gifts and talents. But the question becomes, how will they be guided to use those gifts and talents? My parents chose to be drug dealers. I have chosen to be a hope dealer. Those are two very different things, but a lot of the same skills and talents, just used in different ways. So here we were in this home, and there were 5 of us, 5 kids, and we had 4 different fathers. And my mother had given birth to us from age 15 or 16 to like 25, 26, I'm not really sure about the time frame. And so when I remember being in that home, I remember, Lord of mercy, just stuff everywhere, bags everywhere, money everywhere. I remember guns being everywhere, every kind of gun known to man. They believed in the Second Amendment, you hear me? I remember people coming and going in our house all the time. I just remember all of that stuff. But you know what?
Aww.
Even though by your mind, that was a lot of chaos and dysfunction. But for this little girl who lived in that house, I was a happy-go-lucky little kid. I really was. I think I was kind of cute, too. But that is a jacked-up hairstyle. I have no idea what my mom was thinking. What was yarn? Gosh, that's awful. So, this little girl, where are my elementary teachers? Elementary, okay. So, this little girl looks like little kids that come into your school every day, right? Because, and you made a point, Mr. Superintendent, that was dead on and connected directly with what I was going to say, and that is this, that a lot of times we think about a kid's situation and we think, oh my gosh, this is awful, you know, that poor child. But at the end of the day, when Maslow's laws are being met, kids can learn and function even in the midst of chaos. Because especially small children, they don't understand the nature and the gravity of the bad stuff. That's why I get so angry when adults judge children based on decisions that adults are making, that they have absolutely no control over. I was this happy-go-lucky little kid. I didn't know my parents were doing all this bad stuff and all this stuff was happening. I thought everybody had 50 guns. I thought piles of money sitting around was just a thing. It was our money. People coming and going in our house all the time. I thought we were kind of popular, right? Like, we were the hangout house. I mean, I loved my siblings. I didn't know we had different daddies. I didn't care. I loved them, played with my toys. I was just this regular kid because none of the bad things were directly impacting me. But whenever you have that level of dysfunction, eventually something's going to happen, right? Because I don't know about y'all, I don't know any drug dealers that are retired with their 401k, right? It doesn't work that way. Eventually something happens. And my parents were no exception. So literally a few months after that photo was taken, my dad got busted for dealing drugs and he went to prison. And while he was in prison, my mom was trying to hold down the drug business herself, but she broke the cardinal rule of drug dealing. She started to use their product heroin, and she became a heroin addict. And for reasons unknown to me to this day, one day she packed up our clothes, and it was the end of the summer, about this time of the year. It wasn't unusual. You know, back in the day, we didn't really vacation. We would go visit our folks, right? You go visit your grandma and your cousins or whatever. And so she packed up our clothes, and she took me and my younger sister, we had the same dad. She took us down to Planton, Alabama, to live with my grandmother. And left us there, and we didn't know we were living there or what was going on, and she just took us to grandmother. Now let me tell you something about this woman. This grandmother of mine, she was one of those old school matriarchs, but she was very courageous because this woman left a violent marriage in the 60s with 8 children. Woo! That was Women didn't do that back then. They would just stay and bear it, but not her. She was courageous. She wanted more for her children. And so she left, and she cleaned houses for a living and to make ends meet, a good woman of faith. I mean, did what she needed to do, basically sacrificed her life for her children and now her grandchildren. So she left me there with my grandmother. And then she took my middle sister to Hueytown, Alabama, near Birmingham, and left her at a dance house, and arranged for my only brother and oldest sister to stay in Huntsville with her sister because they were about to start school. And she went back to that housing project, and she took out one of her guns and committed suicide. So now I know I'm in dysfunction, but I learn about it in such a harsh way. I didn't have adults that would sit down with me and talk with me and help me process my grief and try to understand what was happening. No, I would overhear grown folks talking about stuff. And I would hear grown folks saying stuff like, what was their mama thinking? Getting all strung out on those drugs and stringing those 5 children across the state for everybody to have to take care of. And then their sorry daddy, he's in and out of jail, blah, 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 blah. Well, when you hear that, what do you start to think? You start to think we're a burden on people. Nobody wants us. Even our parents have checked out on us. Guys, that's a bad feeling. So now, this little girl, my mom's committed suicide. My dad's in and out of jail and not stepping up to the plate to take care of us. I'm separated from my siblings for the first time in my life, living in a new place. I'm actually experiencing hunger insecurity for the first time because my grandmother, as hard as she worked, she wasn't well educated, she cleaned houses for a living, and she had to have food assistance. I mean, I went from always having stuff and food not being an issue to now, instead of 3 meals a day, it might be 2 meals a day. And I also went from food just being there to now having to, because back then, you couldn't get an EBT card and go to the store like everybody else. Back in the day, food assistance was actually food. You had to go to the counter department, you had to stand in line, and they would give you bags of flour, blocks of cheese, sugar, that sort of the staples that would sustain you throughout the month. Now, I will say this, I digress here to say, that government cheese slapped. That government cheese was really good. I would buy it today over crap, anyway. It just didn't. But, so now, this is my reality. And if all of that wasn't enough, and let me apologize in advance if what I'm about to say triggers any of you from your own past. But if all of that was not enough, within a month of me moving into that house with my grandmother, one of her young adult sons started to sexually abuse me on a regular basis. So when I tell you that I know what darkness is like, I know what darkness is like. And it is horrible. It is awful. When I wrote my book, More Than a Bird, I wanted to know what was that little girl like once she moved to Clanton, Alabama, and all of that happened. And I interviewed several ladies in my community, and one of the ladies, I'll summarize for Miss Pollock, she said, baby, it was so sad. She said, you were just in this shell. You just really took your mama's death off. She said you walked all slumped over, you looked down, you mumbled when you talked, we had to tell you to speak up, you wouldn't make eye contact with folks. Said you were just in this shell. She said, but baby, after a while, you just snapped out of it. Huh? Snapped out of it. You're sitting there asking yourself, how in the world? All of those things, and I'm standing here today like this, I just have 2 words to explain it to you. But God.